Good evening all. We are back with ECLA again on Thursday as we usually do. This time we gave ourselves about maybe 2-3 weeks in order to compile current issues and to be more effective in delivering the messages. ለእናንተ ያለን መልእክት አሁን ተጨባጭ የሆነ ነገር እንዲሆንና እንዲሁም ደግሞ በመሃል ጊዜያችንን ሰተን ተዘጋጅተን በደንብ ወደ እናንተ እንድንመጣ እንግዲህ እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ የዛሬው እንዳያችሁት ለየት ያለ ፕሮግራም ነው ያለን በመጀመሪያ ግን ከኢሲኤልኤ የአናውንስመንት አለን አንደኛው የፌስቡክ ፔጃችን አዲስ ፔጅ ያመጣን ነውና ECLA ይላል ስለዚህ ሪኩዌስት ሲመጣ ለጓደኝነት ወይም ደግሞ እናንተም ላይክ አርጋችሁ ከሁሉም ሰው ጋር ሼር እንድታረጉት እንጠይቃለን እና ECLA የሚል ሪኩዌስት ሲመጣ ባካችሁ ያንን ሪኩዌስት ተቀበሉ so our Facebook page we have changed our name to ECLA it's something technical but it's the same organization so please like it confirm accept the request and also like it and share it with others another thing is that we're still doing is the membership fee you can go online and there is a ways now to collect for you to make payments recurrent payments and all type of payments with your credit cards and other ways of doing it እና የመክፈል ሁኔታ ለሜምበርሺፕ አባላት የሆናችሁ ሁሉ ይሄንን ክፍያውን ለማድረግ አሁን ተዘጋጅቶ በኦንላይን በዌብሳይቱም ላይ ያለ ገብታችሁ ባካችሁ በሱ እንድትተባበሩ እንጠይቃለን ሌላ የሜምበርሺፕ ሪክሩትመንት ነው አባላት ቁጥር እንዲጨምር we need more members to come in so that we can get even larger than what we are now so that we can really address the issues not only the issues but then work also on so many things in Los Angeles and around the area so today it is something that we were all looking forward to but before that I have another announcement that I forgot I'm really sorry there is also in Los Angeles one organization organized by local residents and it's led by Fasil Abbebe መሪ ሆኖ በሎስ አንጀለስ አካባቢ የሚኖሩ ሰዎች እንግዲህ በዚህ ሀገር ብቻ ላሉ ኢትዮጵያኖች ብቻ ሳይሆን እርዳታውና ችግራችንን መካፈል ያለብን ኢትዮጵያም ወገኖቻችን ያሉትን ለመርዳት በዚህ በኮቪድ-19 ምክንያት ብዙ ቤቶች ብዙ ሰዎች ህይወታቸው የተናጋ አይደለም በኢትዮጵያ በዚህ እንኳን ብዙ ሰዎች አለንና ፋሲል አበበ በሚመራው የታስክ ፎርስ የኮቪድ-19 ታስክ ፎርስ ለኢትዮጵያ የሚላክና ለእርዳታ የሚካሄዳልና በሱ ላይ ትብብራችሁን ይጠይቃሉ Facebook page አላቸው GoFundMe page አላቸው ደግሞ ያም ካልሆነ ገነት ሬስቶራንት መሰብ ሬስቶራንትና የገኒ ሚኒ ማርኬት እየሄዳችሁ የምትችሉትን ያህል ክፍያ እንድታደርጉ ይሄ ኦርጋናይዜሽን ያሳስባል ሁላችንም መረዳዳት ያለብን ጊዜ ነው አሁን እና ይሄንን አጥብቀን እንጠይቃለን ሁላችሁም ይሄንን የምትከታተሉ እንግዲህ ዛሬ እንዳየነው አሁን በሎስ አንጀለስ አካባቢም ሆነ በአለም ውስጥም ሆነ ብዙ የሚካሄዱ ነገሮች አሉ ከዚህ እንግዲህ ለየት ብሎ የመጣው አሁን ከጆርጅ ፍሎይድ ግድያ በኋላ ከተሞች ጠቅላላ በሎስ አንጀለስም ሆነ በአካባቢው በአለምም ንቅናቄን ፈጥሯል እና እኛ ኢትዮጵያኖች እዚህ ውስጥ ወደንም ጠላንም ስላለንበት ይሄንን ለመረዳት ያሉትን ለውጦች የሚካሄዱትን ለውጦች ይሄ ደግሞ መንስኤው ከየት መጣ ለምን መጣ ለሚለው በሁለት ከፍለን ዛሬ እንወያያለን የመጀመሪያዎቹ የምንኮራባቸው የኛው ወጣቶች ከኛ ጋር አሉ። ያው እንግዲህ ንግግራችን በእንግሊዘኛ ይሆናል ከነሱ ጋር። ከዛ በኋላ ደግሞ ካውንስልመን ኸርብ ወሰንና ወንድማችን ኤልያስ ወንድሙ 7 PM ላይ እነሱ ደግሞ ይመጣሉ። የመጀመሪያውን ሰዓት ግን ለሄዋን አስፋው፣ ለምህረት ካሳና ለሜላት እድሉን ሰጥተን እንነጋገራለን እና እንግዲህ አብራችሁ ቆዩን። ጥያቄ ካላችሁ በኦንላይን ላይ በዚህም በቻቱም ልጠይቁን ትችላላችሁ። በፌስቡክም ላይቭ መከታተል ትችላላችሁ ፕሮግራሙን። So I'll go straight to the program now. For the past month or so, the movement happening here locally throughout the nation and the world could not be ignored. Unfortunately, in 2020, we're still talking about equity, racial disparity, and advocacy, and all that. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we are where we are now. So our first 3 guests who will be with us the first hour will discuss on the significance of the present movement, the necessary actions to be taken, and how important the movement is for Ethiopian and Ethio-Americans and how we can get involved. So our guests today are Hewan Asfaw, community organizer and member of Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles. And as you know, Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder. And it's a global organization in the US, UK, and Canada. We do have Mihret Kasa, artist, community organizer, and energy practitioner. And then we have Melat Bekele, founder and chair of Abesha Networks, with the goal of mobilizing and empowering community to do better together within the Ethiopian and Eritrean community and beyond. And I really want to welcome on behalf of ECLA and the Ethiopian community, all of you that are here. We're very excited to have you. And hopefully what we will share today will educate us and see where we're at. And to be honest, to be the generation that is coming up and making this changes and having an impact on social issues and so on, we are so proud of you. And I hope you will continue doing that. And I hope also we'll have a chance to work together with ECLA. So the first thing is, of course, we have to reflect from the present movement, from what's going on now, and to recognize how significant it is. So Hewan, can you tell me how significant is this movement at this present time now?
Sure. Thank you so much for that opening. And I just want to start by saying I'm super excited to be on this call and to be on a call with a number of Ethiopian people that are having this conversation. It's an exciting time to be alive and to be living through history. I also just want to start by acknowledging the land we're on. I think all of us on this call, most of us are based in Los Angeles. We are on Tongva land. And, you know, sometimes people name the native people of this land as, sometimes it can be an insincere gesture or performative. But I think in the context of these conversations where we're recognizing history, acknowledging the harms and legacy of genocide, it's important. And as Ethiopian people, it's important. We have so much pride in our land and in our culture where we come from. And so we have to reciprocate that honor and remember the people that were here and whose land we are on. So what are we witnessing right now? We're witnessing so many things. I honestly never thought, as someone who has been identifying as a prison abolitionist since I was 15 years old, people thought a world without police was so impossible, literally calling me crazy. I stayed committed to the vision. And I think what we're witnessing now is so many things. I think one, we are living under the Trump regime. So we are living under an administration that has exposed everything that we know to be true about this country. The racism, the genocide, the stealing of land, the oppression of so many people and identities. He totally just lifted that veil and accelerated us into this moment. If there was one good thing that came out of him being president, it was that. And I think the other thing too is just the multiple emergencies, crisis that we are dealing with at one time, from a global pandemic to shelter in place, to really dealing with the repercussions of climate change, to unemployment, to school closures, to underfunded communities, schools. And on top of that, we have the police trying to continue to uphold the status quo. And that's why the police are the target. They are not here for the community or the people. They're literally here to protect these racist structures. I think also people are realizing that we hear all these things around the system being broken. It needs to be fixed. But I just want to be really clear that the system is doing exactly what it was set up to do. It was set up to uphold white power, white supremacy, and oppress the rest of us. And so we have to really, we're at a place where people are changing that narrative. And they're saying, actually, there's no, reform is off the table. And I think that's another thing that makes this moment really significant. People are not talking about reform. They're talking about defunding the police, and they're talking about abolition. And they're not just talking about abolition of the police state. They're talking about the system of capitalism. They're talking about every single way that we live our lives has been under the construction of white supremacy, white power. And people are like looking around, especially the young people are looking around and saying, oh, this actually does not work for me, my family, my community, or my life. And so I think we're not just in a political shift, we're in a cultural shift where people are saying, we don't want to do this anymore. We tried it. And I think especially with Obama being president, God bless him. But I just want to remind folks, and we talk about this all the time in BLM, that the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement happened under a Black president. And there's a lot of that alone is just a bar. It's like a period, you know. We have literally checked off every single box around what we can do to try to reform the system and make it better. Nothing has worked. A Black person has had the highest position of power. He was labeled a deporter in chief. He had the rise of a black young masses rising up and saying enough is enough. And so I think those are some of the huge things that make us make this moment so significant. We're not just experiencing a political shift, we're witnessing the rise of a spiritual awakening and mass consciousness. And it's an exciting time to be alive.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's good always to see this type of moment, the positive aspect of it, so that it can help us move on. If we keep dwelling of exactly what's going on the streets and then criticize the little things that are happening, it will cover the picture of the bigger goal that we're trying to achieve. And then I think most of us, yes, it's sad of what's happening, but then also I think it's a bridge to the next chapter. So hopefully we'll do that. And with that said, Mehret, I'll come to you. As Haywan put it, it's just a movement, significant, and not only locally here. It didn't stay only in Minneapolis, it just went big, and the world has shaken. So why do you think George Floyd's murder really shook the world this way?
Thank you, Anas. Thank you, Anas and ECLA, for having me and for having us to speak on here. Filipino Mama Sa Ganachu. And thank you, Haywan, for acknowledging the land keepers that were here long before we were ever given the privilege to immigrate to this land. I think everything that Haywan said is literally the chemistry and the buildup for what happened with George Floyd. I think if we kind of zoom out a little bit on this time, there were a lot of desensitizations that were happening with just like gun violence and like the actual, even the sound of gunshots. I think like there's been like a desensitization to it. And when there was another Black man that was killed in a very similar way to another Black man that was killed years ago, Eric Garner, it activated so many things on so many different levels. Just like Haywan was saying, it's a spiritual awakening of consciousness. It's not just this thing of like, oh, Black people matter. It's not just this thing of like, oh, the police need to be defunded. It's literally, we've been able to take these past 7 years and zoom out from those isolated incidents that the media tried to portray as isolated, And we've shown that it really is the whole entire system. Like this whole story and this narrative that we bought into is a lie, right? And so I think the visceral imagery of George Floyd having his life taken away by the literal like suffocation, like his breath, the thing in Amaringa we say nefs, like the very thing that we believe has been given to us by our creator in such an agonizing and in a slow way kind of woke up the fact that these people don't see us as human. These people have set up a system in which they have labeled themselves as the definition of what it means to be human, right? Like, I'm a human, you're a human, Melat, like all of us on this call are human beings because we have come from the earth, we were made by a creator. Whatever your belief system is, the reason why we are human beings is we've all known and realized this. But the virus that is white supremacy has shown that they don't see anyone outside of white, cis male, heterosexual, Christian, and very specific type of Christianity. It's very much like Protestantism, evangelicalism. And not to say that any of those things inherently are wrong or bad, right? Those identities are not the issue. The issue is that there is a system that upholds that as the thing to attain. That is who you are supposed to be in order to be treated like a human being, in order to not be questioned why you exist. I think that's the biggest thing, that there's a reason why there's like an international awakening, specifically within the continent and the diaspora, is that the hopes and the dreams that we've been fed all of our lives by the media of what it means to come to the West and what it means to have our own freedom, right? Because a lot of us come from different countries where our freedom was not seen as being human as well, right? So if we can understand where we came from and see that that same mentality and that same system is here just in a lot more suppressed and like with way better PR and way better media coverage outside of this country, then we can understand and start and begin that conversation of what it means to have a piece in this, right? To feel like this is actually happening to me as well. Regardless of how you feel, how you identify, or any of that stuff, this system is also, one thing that we actually have to remember is that the system is also oppressive to white people as well. So this is something that is insidious. This is something that is very sneaky, that is now just coming to light. And I believe that that's why George Floyd, the way in which that his life was taken was such an activator, right? It was an activator for all of these things to happen.
Okay. Thank you for your view. It's just, again, we hope that we are awake enough and that we will not go back to where we were before, and that all the movements that are here will keep us going to the next stage. And while we're doing that, Melat, I'll come to you. As you know, as Ethiopians living around Los Angeles or even in other cities, I know you lived in DC and some other cities also, but if we come to being Ethiopian and being Ethiopian American or the second generation here, I want to ask you what the reaction was from your members, if there are any from the Abesha Network's members, and also how do you think, I mean, we have seen it on Facebook, we have seen it live, our spiritual fathers going and being part of this movement, and even giving the platform to say what they think about this. So how do you think that has an impact on overall Ethiopian community in Los Angeles and beyond?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna first start out just like the girls, thanking you guys for letting us speak today. But to just get into the question, I mean, for Ethiopians, we, first and foremost from the network and just what we're seeing in general, is that we're not being bystanders. And I think that's really important. I think we're collaborating in this effort with Black Lives Matter, everything that's going on in this movement of trying to make sure that we are representing and supporting, because I think we all know, you know, traditionally there's always been somewhat of a disconnect between, a lot of times we know history, which is there's a disconnect between Africans and Ethiopians and Americans. And again, we understand that was capacity issues because when the first generation came, their struggle was just trying to survive, right? So for Abishaz, when we all first got here, it was just how can we survive? And I think for the second generation was what we're seeing now with Maharet and Hewan is that we have the capacity to go out and actually fight this battle with them together. So that's what you're seeing is the fruit and labor really of our parents bringing us here and us having the capacity and opportunity to do that. So from us watching the network, I mean, so many people are getting involved in their local communities, getting involved in policies and things that we haven't really seen before this. And then when you were talking in reference to having our, pastors and cases at these events, I mean, from what we've seen when we posted about it is that there's such a large respect and love that we've seen from it because people just feel proud. I think because we've never seen anything like that. When have you ever seen cases support in this kind of manner? I mean, it's really made, I got so many messages, personal messages from people that said, this has made me cry. This is giving me so much hope because watching our community leaders stand up and have a voice, we haven't seen that. So for us to be in that line and fight together with the Black community instead of separating ourselves was huge. So for me, I mean, I'm proud to be along this ride with everybody. Again, I also think there's a level of how we all engage. And I think that's what we're seeing. Engagement looks different in every way for everybody. So for some people, it's protesting. That is how they engage. For other people, it's financial contribution. But some way or somehow, we're seeing that using your time, using your skills, and using your money to back up and having a voice. I mean, that's what we're seeing through the community. And I think that's the way that's being most effective because we can be, to be honest, like these kind of conversations are important because we need to have them. We need to have open dialogue, but we need to have the action also behind it. And I think that's what we're seeing that's really happening now is it's not just everybody, talking, but it's everybody out there actually putting in the work.
Wonderful. Okay, and we also hope that this will continue, and then you guys also will be more involved in the Ethiopian community and be part of the movement together, whether for social justice here or back home or everything. So hopefully we'll join hands together and moving on. So now, we talked about the movement at the present time, so I'll come to you, Hewan. There are so many problems and so many causes for this to happen. And one of them, I picked equity. And why is that important? And why should we concentrate on equity?
This is a great question. I work in a racial equity organization, and which made sense maybe a few months ago, but we're in a whole new moment. And one of the conversations I've been having in my workplace is that in our current context right now, with everything happening, equity cannot be the start or endpoint because we do not live under a fair and impartial system. And so, we need to take a lot of steps back, generational steps back, and talk about justice. And justice is like, especially, I know there's so many Christian folks, Ethiopian Orthodox folks on this call, and just to ground us in at least, I grew up in the Orthodox Ethiopian church, and one of the pillars is justice. And that was, and that so much of that is around not this idea of equity. How do we all get what you have? Which is so wrong. I don't want what they have. And how do we actually put a moral and ethical lens that helps us differentiate what is right and what is wrong? And all of us need to do that internal work. And so justice has us thinking about things like reparations, accountability for the things that have happened, even acknowledgement, the genocide of Native people, the enslavement of Black Africans with no acknowledgement. This country has not acknowledged or have done anything to repair the trauma, pain, and that has lasted generations. And so, so I think equity is important, but equity for me is not the answer. It's justice moving us into a place where all of us can be liberated and free. And I think equity is very much a tool of white supremacy. It's very much rooted in the American dream that a lot of our I just want to name also, I'm mixed Ethiopian. My mother's Korean, my father's Abasha. And so coming from those two identities, so much of my life has been shaped by displacement, militarism, war, and migration. And so much of that is rooted in colonization. And so how do we really, I know these words get used a lot, but how do we really decolonize our mind to understand freedom and justice and equity in a different way than how we've been trained to think about it?
Okay, all right. So parallel to that, I'll come to you, Mehret. Another thing that we can also talk about is racial disparity and systematic racism that exists and has been existing. And it looks like for me, it's kind of behind the curtain, and what's going on behind the curtain without us seeing it. They're not out there, but then they're there, but we cannot see them. So can you discuss briefly the intersectionality of these two, the racial disparity and the systematic racism?
Sure. So one thing I do want to define before I go into racial disparity and systemic racism is the difference between systemic and systematic. And there are definitely like people on this call that have more knowledge than I do. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But in my understanding and in my experience, systemic is referring to the entire system and of how racist it is, and systematic is the ways in which it happens. So like the process of it, right? And so when we're talking about racial disparity and systemic racism, to me, they're the same thing. To me, there's no like cause and effect of like, oh, there's a disparity between the different races, which by the way, races were definitely constructed and they're false constructs to uphold this system, right? Just to put that out there. Mm-hmm. So all of these like false like strongholds that have been put up and that have been set up to oppress as well as to suppress those of us from which they wish to extract from, right? So a lot of the history of systemic racism has been extraction, right? Capitalism within this country started because they literally took people from the continent and brought them here. And so that was the system with which this country was built off of. And so for me, the disparity continues because that's what started it, right? Just because Emancipation Proclamation happened, or just because even Juneteenth, which we just celebrated last week, happened, and like the celebration of like the non-enslavement of us in very like obvious, overt ways does not mean that that system did not mutate and change into very like covert ways of enslavement, AKA like the prison industrial complex, school to prison pipeline, all of these things that continue that enslavement. So for me, it goes beyond just like racial disparity, and obviously like there's levels to it, right? We see it in our economics, we see it in the medical industry, we see it in the wellness complex, we see it in politics, we see it everywhere, right? But I think that racial disparity is there as almost like the cover story for like the bigger agenda to keep us enslaved.
Okay. So I'll stay with you on this because, we just talked about, of course, Haywan brought up justice and equity and the problems that we are facing. And we know for sure the protest on the streets, the screaming for what Black Lives Matter is doing, let our voice be heard, cannot be a solution just doing that. We need to go in and then make significant changes. So when we face all this, in your view, should we do it all at once, try to do it all at once, or there is, for example, Haywan has mentioned it, before equity, let's talk about justice. So how do we effectively address the problems? Do we all address them all at once, or do we prioritize them? How do you think it should be done, just in your point of view?
Okay. So for me, I think I want to address the equity versus justice part first. I think I think the biggest thing that we can do, especially as Habesha people, especially as like East African diaspora people, is really investigate the stories that we've been told, right? So this like idea of equity, this idea of being equal or having the same thing as the person at the top is definitely a story that we've been told. And I think internally, like what Hewan was saying, the inner work of like really investigating, like, where did I hear this from? Who told me this? When was the first time that like I ever heard this, like ever? And then get to more of like the root of it, right? So like an examination of the actual problem, right? A real and true examination of the actual problem will help us to see that the solutions are very, very simple in their energy, or in their feeling, right? The feeling of justice is very simple, versus like equity has like all of these different things, right? All of these different steps. So when you think of justice, when you think of mercy, when you think of compassion, those same principles that we talk about in church, that we talk about in temple, that we talk about in the masjid, like all these things are the things that we want, right? So I think starting at the basis of that is, in my opinion, as someone who is a practitioner and who is coming at this system from a different point of view, I'm coming from like the inner work perspective, and holding it down for like doing like what the inner work is, whether it be with a therapist, whether it be with a priest, whether it be with a sheikh, whether it be with an energy worker or a breath worker. There's so much, yes, Ruth, there's so much unlearning that needs to happen first in order for us to actually understand. And that unlearning can happen while we take action, right? That's not to say that you have to do both. And I'm not prescribing like a should thing here, but understanding that unlearning and recalibrating, kind of like what Hewan was saying earlier, of like a few months ago that was cool, but now we're in a totally different time, right? Adjusting and seeing and refining our worldview will definitely help to see what the solution is, right? And like you said, Yoni, like the solution is not this like one directional, one dimensional thing, right? There are those of us who have been called to the front line. There are those of us who have been called to the hospitals because the virus that is infecting us at higher rates is still a thing. There are those of us who have been called to be like support for the frontline people, as medics, as bail support people. There are also those of us who are holding it down on the spiritual side of things, and really making sure that like those people that are on the front lines have enough resources to keep going and to not burn out. There are also those of us who are simply just like doing the work inside so that we don't keep perpetuating those things, right? And so I think the biggest solution, at least for me, is in your own individual self, listening to the thoughts that come to you when you see people out on the street, when you see what happens when people are looting, when you see people destroying property, and seeing the feelings that come up and being like, where did I hear this from? Why do I have judgment? Why do I feel a way about this thing? And then really investigating that, because if we don't examine the ways in which white supremacy has literally been passed down from generation to generation, and it's not just in America, this is a global thing. Colonization has touched everyone, including the countries that were never colonized. And I'm sorry if that's controversial, but the ways in which Western white supremacist ideology has infected our societies is so sneaky. I know that's the only word I can use right now, is very sneaky. And so I think for me, what I'm going to hold down in this conversation of how we should take action is really see the ways in which you don't see another person as human, and ask where that came from. It doesn't matter what kind of human they are, you know? So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. I mean, you gave us a lot of information, and it's amazing how, you can break it down like this so that we can really clearly understand your point of view as far as facing the challenges and what we can do to take action. And in this, I'll come to you, Melat. As a founder and also a chairperson for Habesha Networks, one of the things that you do is also creating a bridge as younger entrepreneurs and people who want to be part of that, I don't know if we can call it American dream, or, get hold of things in society. And you're becoming this person who created that platform for young Ethiopian Americans and also for others. So there was also an event that I think it's also on your website, where you say bridging the gap. So what is that objective? What were the objective, and how do you think that could be accomplished with everything that we said? I mean, how do you bring in people into the system and still tell them, oh, we can succeed together?
Yeah. So before I get to how we did the Bridge a Gap event, the way we kind of even started with Habesha Networks is we did community development workshops. So we're in about 19 cities, and half of our cities, we've been trying to do these community workshops where we ask the community, like, what do you want? What are your concerns? What do you see the future of this community looking like? Because what it looks like in LA is different from what our Habesha Networks looks like in DC, London, Ethiopia, all the different places. Like, all the Habesha communities have different resources, needs, all of that. So we decided when we did those workshops, we were hearing so much about issues about identity, and that was coming up for a lot of people. They had issues with where did they identify. I don't feel Habesha enough because, look, I can't speak Amharinya. I don't feel Black because I grew up in this neighborhood, so I didn't really grow up around Black people. So people were feeling marginalized, and they felt that alone. That was what we were hearing from so many Habesha communities, is that people were having these issues with identity and how do they fit in, because they didn't feel like they could fit in with any side. So because of that, we decided that we knew we needed to also do an event that was really intentional with, because we try to be inclusive with our events. We don't say you have to be Ethiopian or Eritrean to come to our community events, because let's be real, there's people who are connected to the country and to the community who aren't Ethiopian or Eritrean. So that's important for us to have that inclusivity. But outside of that, we wanted to make sure that we were discussing these things, not with just ourselves, again, because that conversation can sort of be redundant. We all kind of had similar experiences. So for us, we decided, okay, let's team up with another group, which was Amplify Africa. They're more of a Pan-African group. And then we decided to also do it in Leimert Park. And that, for that purpose, is because that's a Black community. And we've been realizing we were doing events all different places in LA. We were doing it in Beverly Hills. We were doing it in downtown. But why aren't we also supporting the communities that a lot of us live in and are a part of? So that was why we decided, we need to be intentional with this event and do it at Leimert Park. And the conversation was around a lot of things. We talked about, we had 3 different panelists, and they also gave their experiences going back home. So one had been back home, and she had gone back and forth. Another one, she had never been back home. And then one individual wasn't even African at all. He was actually American, but he wanted to go back, and he actually went to Ethiopia. So they all gave their experiences being, a first generation, being somebody who's not even from the continent, and having that experience of how they connected with back home. And then the other part of the conversation was about, how are we gonna do something about this? Like, how are we gonna work with the disconnects between Africans, between African and Americans, because we're watching, we're all having these conversations, but we're not having them together. So that was the idea of that. We need to have this conversation together. And again, not just have the conversation, what are tangible action items we can do moving forward? So that was kind of our thought behind this, because again, there's so many resources, but we're not connecting the dots. That's the whole issue. We're not mobile. And the Ethiopian proverb, you go far when we go together.
Yes.
Say correctly, but you know what I'm talking about. So that proverb is real, because again, if we keep, working on our own siloed groups and communities, we're never going to get anywhere. We look at the Jewish community, and you see how well they understand what the idea of community is. And I think, for me at least, my goal and my hope is that our Habesha community can be more like that. I wish we were better about being collaborative and connecting and supporting each other. So
yeah, in this, let's stay with this. So during those conversations, during those meetings, is there also an open discussion about what Mehret and Hewan mentioned about the justice, how things are unfair, and so on? Is there an open conversation between the African Americans, the Ethiopians, and so on? Do you think that is an open conversation within that, or do we just say, oh, you know what, if you want it, you can have it, type of thing?
Well, I mean, that day we talked somewhat about, of course, the injustice that happens, because again, when anybody gets pulled over, they don't know I'm Ethiopian, they're gonna say I'm Black, right? So that whole idea of just trying to connect the fact that we're all one Black community and that it doesn't matter. We talked a lot about how what happens to one of us affects all of us. And I actually saw a pastor, Masai, he had put this, that he put, I don't remember what Bible verse, so please don't judge me, but it's the Bible verse where it talks about, you know, God has the sheep and he takes, you know, 99 of the sheep are with him, but one goes away. So as he goes to tend to that one sheep, it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about the other 99, but he just wants to make sure that sheep is tended to.
Yes.
Brought that up because the whole idea of like, the way God and the way all of this happens is if something's happening to one of us, it's happening to all of us, and how we need to tend to even that one that's suffering. So again, the idea of being a community, being collective is what I think we're trying to push for.
Okay, that is great. And again, we applaud you for what you're doing, and then to keep doing it also. And it's about time that we create also that platform where we discuss clearly about what's going on really out there, and whether, as you said, whether we're Ethiopians or not, we're considered as Black when we are seen on the street. So I want to come back to, let me go to Mehret. Mehret, you know, again, I'll go back to the side effect, the good thing that happened after this, after George Floyd murder and the movement and so on. We hear big companies changing their mind on things, apologizing, going out and doing what they were supposed to do a while back. So do you consider this as a step forward or an act of seeking just the public support, like a PR thing, and things will go back to normal, and then it's focused on more on the marketing side of it?
You want to know something, Gashonas? I have not actually been paying attention to any of what they've been saying because it's all just like minamente, for lack of a better term. Like it's literally just, because I don't want to curse on here. There are elders here. I want to be very respectful, but it really is like, it's like, that's not what we're asking for, right? Like I've worked in those corporations. I've worked in those companies, and anytime I have ever made a complaint, anytime I have ever tried to tell my story, it's always been shut down, right? And so I come from a marketing background. So the PR, I understand the PR. I know the conversations that all of these people have been having, right? And at the same time, I think it does say something on a very like on a visual level, right? But it's very like it's not enough. Like that's also not what we asked for. Like we didn't ask for that, right? We asked for like you to like defund the police, right? So there are actually corporations as well as like school districts, right? Someone sent me a news article about how Seattle, the Seattle school district literally just said that they've stopped their relationship with Seattle Police Department, right? As far as like policing their schools. So I think the biggest thing, I think if these corporations were like, yeah, we're actually going to stop calling the police when something happens. We're actually going to try to like bring in mental health people. We're actually going to try to bring in people to like deal with these like different issues. If there's like a domestic violence issue, if there's like people that are trained, that have years and years of experience, expertise, those of us who are just entering into the wellness space, you know what I'm saying? Like we're actually gonna commit to like not having that be our first resort. That I think would be the preferred message for me versus like we stand with Black lives. Of course you do. We buy your products. Like of course you do. Like we watch your TV. Of course you do. We drive your cars, we wear your shoes, we do the things, right? We live in this country and there are essentials that we need and we decide that we're gonna, purchase them from these specific corporations, right? So I think it could go harder, right? I definitely think it can go harder, especially because in this country, corporations have been defined as individuals, right? For voting purposes, for power purposes, right? Like certain corporations be funding politicians, let's get real. They be funding certain measures. They fund certain things to happen for them within the thing, right? So for me, it's more about what are you doing right? What are you doing to move the power, to decentralize, to take it away from the center? Take that power that you have as a corporation and literally put it in the hands of the people, so that come election day, we're not voting against Nike. Come election day, we're not, as an example, we're not fighting against these corporations, right? These like messages of solidarity are cute. They're real cute, just like my hair. They're real cute, but it's not. Come back to me when you have a plan that involves not just hiring people that look like me for diversity and inclusion, right? Not just hiring diversity and inclusion people, not just hiring me as a consultant. Hire me as the COO of marketing. Hire me if I so choose, right? Hire me as the person who is there to really affect change, or seed my company. Give me money for being CEO. I don't know. Like, I would rather invest.
A lot of possibilities.
There's so many. The possibilities are literally infinite. And for my own personal, just like politic and like my journey, I'm more interested in like building our own, right? And pivoting away, so that when everything does burn down, because it will, when everything does go away, we have what it is that is nourishing and aligned for us as human beings.
Okay. All right. You know, with this again, I'll go to Haywan, because again, the side effect of this movement, I mean, she clearly told us on, you know, Mehra touched about the corporate world and how, and they did it before and they did it again now. And the only way we can see that this is really true is how they sustain it in the future, how it's going to go on, how it's going to change the corporate politics within itself. But also what brought this is the removals of Confederate monuments, memorials, and so on. I mean, these are really happening in the cities, and people going at night so that we won't have any, you know, riots or anything, like cities allowing people to take them down during the night. So how do you think how significant or how impactful it is? And vis-a-vis to Black Lives Matters movement and so on, how do you think this will have an impact going forward?
Great question. I want to start this question off by just reminding folks that there are a ton of people in the streets right now, under the banner of Black Lives Matter. But you know, Black Lives Matter was intentionally built to be a decentralized organization for this very reason. Because it is the epitome of a mass movement. And so I just want to remind folks that, because I feel like protesters and folks on the streets get lumped into one category. And really what it is that there is something fundamentally wrong with our system. People are upset. They're seeing the failures and all of the cracks, and they're in the streets. And there's a lot of different reasons, political ideologies, you know, intentions. But I think one important thing around these monuments coming down is it's that for so long, our history has been told to us. It's been told that, you know, I feel like up until recently, we're celebrating Columbus Day. So this is a moment where people are literally rewriting history. Like, we are no longer letting white, cis, heterosexual, male colonizers create our history, shape our culture, and hoard power. Like, those days are done. And so I think that I will just end there. Where we are reauthoring our stories, we are we're shifting the narrative. Okay.
All right. So with that said, after seeing all this, I'll stay with you, Haywan. What is the role of the youth, and what advice do you give, not only to get involved, but stay involved in this social justice issues? So as I said earlier, not just go out, protest and so on, and I did my part, but for this to be sustainable, for this to continue, we need a different type of war kind of thing, fighting, right? So what do you suggest for the young youth to go on and keep going with this movement?
This is a great question, and this is the perfect crowd to have this question with, because Growing, so even though I'm mixed Korean, I only grew up with my Ethiopian family, Ethiopian church, Ethiopian upbringing to the fullest. And so much of what I have learned that has made me so proud to be Ethiopian is our reverence for our culture, our language, our history, and our legacy of resisting and fighting, especially fighting colonialism, colonizers. And I was organized at 15 years old. And one of the first activities, it was an after school program. My first campaign I ever did was trying to stop the MTA, now the MTA, from raising public transportation prices. From there, it became trying to eliminate the cops in LA schools giving kids tickets for being late. I remember one of the first activities when I joined this club was asking a group of high school students to imagine a world without police. So many of us were stunted. We're like, what does that even mean? What does that even look like? Literally not being able. And it was a real moment. It was a shift for me of like, God damn, like I remember feeling scared. Like, why can't I tap into my imagination of something outside of something possible outside of what this is? And I think that is really the power of young people. Young people, they come with the ideas, the imagination, the resilience to shift things. And I think, especially as Ethiopian folks or Abashab people, we pride ourselves so much on being cultural creators. Yeah. We pride ourselves so much on our music, our food, everything about our culture. We have so much pride. And I just want to like say this out loud to the folks on the call that culture is shaped by people, right? We cannot allow culture to shape people. We shape culture, which means it's always transforming. As the world changes around us, culture changes. Policy, all these other things will never change unless we shift our culture. If we don't like think about how are we fighting for all of us? How are we redefining Blackness? I will share this story. So I, growing up in an Ethiopian family, I heard so much like, oh, we're not Black, we're African. I heard that so much from different people in my family growing up. Part of my journey meant going to Ethiopia. I was supposed to go there for 3 months, stay there for like over a year because I just did not want to come back to this place until I had to. And I think so much of seeing a different culture, seeing Black people in a different context really was just like, oh, wow, like all these things I learned about living in a social construct, just like that all of this is created, like all these kind of rules, laws we follow. Someone made it up. It's not like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the rule of God. Yep. And so when I went to Ethiopia, I heard people in the motherland saying, oh, we're not African, we're Ethiopian. And what I took from that was this really deep shame of trying to separate ourselves from being colonized. Trying to separate ourselves. Oh, we haven't been enslaved. We kicked out our colonizers. But colonization is, like Meheret said, like so insidious. It's so deep. It like everything around us teaches us to attain whiteness and what white people have. And when I went to Ethiopia, it was literally, it changed the whole trajectory of my life, which is like for example, when we are talking about defund the police, I feel like people conflate that with like, we don't need accountability, we don't need safety, everybody's just gonna run around and go wild. Right, and that is not it at all. It is, how do we get back to the ancestral practices of our people of figuring our stuff out, conflict, tension, pain, violence, without the state. We have historically done this. The police have only been around for a couple hundred years. This is a very new concept that comes from the legacy of slavery. Literally, like, I think if anything, young people are waking up, young people are leading the way. And especially like growing up, I'm gonna be very honest, the people like my parents who I love so much, when I would talk about my ideas, my political beliefs, it was not something that they really understood or heard. It was minimized, it was mocked, it was like considered a phase. And I know they love me and they're very proud of me. I know they're probably maybe watching that. But it's real, like there is a way, and as someone who's now 30, I am constantly asking myself, where are the young people? Where are their voices? How am I following now? Because if I at 15 did not have people who are older than me listening to me, taking me seriously, trusting me,
Yeah.
I would not be where I'm at now, which is like 15 years as a committed abolitionist organizer.
Wonderful. And it will be great also that people will listen and not only limited to, as you said, all these policies that will take away a lot of stuff, all the privileges that existed before to make us equal again, but to move on in a daily life, to have leaders like you and hear you and say, you know what, yes, we have to change things. It cannot be the same way that it was before. And one thing that I really like that you said is culture shouldn't shape us. We really have to shape the culture itself. And we should welcome the new ideas and how to move on. And it's not only in technology, but also in our social daily life. And I wish I had more time to talk with you guys, but Melat, let me put a last question for you so we can go to Councilman Herb Wesson after this. What is the role of Ethiopians? What can they play in moving a Black agenda forward?
I mean, the first thing is civic engagement. We've got to get engaged in our local communities. So it could be for running for public office. I know we're starting to see a rise of that here and there in different cities. But I think that would be, I mean, the more we can gain, that's power, right? That what you were talking about, Haywan and Mahdet, like we need to see ourselves in those seats. We need to see ourselves in power also. So I think getting us involved in civic engagement, voting, of course, please vote. I mean, that's number one. Getting involved in groups like ECLA, Ethiopian Democratic Club, things like that, because these are communities that are doing the work right now and have been already doing the work prior to all of this. And that's the thing with this movement. People like Haywan and Mahdet have been doing the work before all of this got popular, right? And so that's the important thing, is like we need to align ourselves with people who've been doing the work and support them, because again, we want to lean on people who are the experts and who've been doing this work. So I think I see us continuing dialogues like this, continuing to do our due diligence and not just giving into everything that's going on, and understanding and trying to find the truth for ourselves.
Wonderful, wonderful. I thank
Can
you
I add
very
one
much.
thing to that?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just really want to say, like, also for the Ethiopian African diaspora, a first step is really healing. Like, it's like, I feel like mental health and healing work is so taboo sometimes because it's associated with whiteness and we don't need to talk about that. But our people have historically been through so much, unless we're being honest about that and healing. And that work can be used in a lot of ways: prayer, connection, forgiving people that have harmed us, letting go of old resentment, like just things that culturally we do. And the other thing is really this piece around intersectionality before we end. I really want to lift it up because I feel like all of us have to really be looking in the mirror. I think someone said in the chat, we have to be looking in the mirror of how do we uphold this culture that we are trying to change? How are we homophobic, transphobic, hating on poor people, talking crap about Black, there's just so many ways that we all have to be looking at ourselves. We cannot look for white people to change stuff anymore. We cannot look for the government. Like, we have the most billionaires and politicians and people in power, and Black faces in high places that has literally done nothing for us. Outside of helping us get to this moment where we're now talking about dismantling and rebuilding from the ground up. So that takes like intersectionality, the people who are at the margins of the margins, who we forget about, who we say we cannot replicate policing system by choosing who's redeemable, who's not, who's worthy of saving, whose lives we're worth fighting for. Anyone that is harmed, they need to be at the center, and we need to work on decolonize our minds in a real way.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Otherwise we come to the table with just mixed feelings and not being pure in our intentions and coming from the heart, really. We come with shame and guilt. So yeah, everything that Haywan said. Thank you.
Again, together, I think we'll achieve a lot more than what has been achieved now, and definitely we'll have you back. And when we are out there having our own ECLA offices, and when we do have the SAP committees working, and I hope you will help us out in order for us to close the gap between generations and also explain what's really in hand and bring the facts out. So I hope you will stay with us while we are going to Councilman Herb Wesson and Elias Wandimu. I hope you will stay with us. And now, thank you very much for answering all the questions and taking your time for this. We're going to go to Councilman Herb Wesson, Los Angeles City Council member, District 10. Councilman Herb Wesson, first of all, we're so grateful to have you on board, and the fact that you are here with us from your busy schedule and dedicate this. And your name is not new to the Ethiopian community, and you're not a stranger for all of us, especially in the Little Ethiopia area. So Councilman Herb Wesson has provided support in the naming of Little Ethiopia on Fairfax Boulevard. And when he served as the chief staff of Council Member Holden, Council Member Wesson supported the yearly New Year's event that happens every September, blocking the streets and recognizing that. And that was the work with the businesses and the cultural community on Fairfax Boulevard. Also, Councilmember Wesson had given the time to welcome our Prime Minister when he came here in 2018 at LAX. And not only that, some of the things also that I heard is that, you know, when they were trying to increase the value of properties around Little Ethiopia, he was the one who was kind of against it, so that the businesses over there can be sustained. And many Ethiopians that I talked to and also say that they echo the sentiment of how warm and joyful and inviting he is when you go to his office. So Council Member Herb Wesson, I hope you are with us. I think you will have to unmute yourself, Councilman. Yes, we got it.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Council Member. And so with you, we have Elias Ondumu. Elias Ondumu, well-known in Los Angeles area,
Yes.
Publisher and editorial director, founder of Sahai Publisher, an academic press housed at Loyola Marymount University here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And also after the closure of Howard University Press in 2011, Sahai Publisher has remained the only Black university press in the Americas and in different parts of the world. So we're so happy to have you here with us, Elias Ondumu. So Councilman, I'll start with you. This is a historical moment for all of us. As we look ahead, we will see many changes in our community, in our country, and in the world. And locally here in LA, you co-authored a motion to cut the budget of LAPD by $130 million. And congratulations, it was adopted 11-3 last week. So we're so happy that you were able to initiate that and see the result of it. But in the same token, some really relate the decrease of the law enforcement with their safety. But can you tell us how this reevaluation will benefit us all, especially unserved and undeserved communities?
Well, first let me say that I'll try to lay out why I believe that it's a benefit. But this moment in time that we're in the United States of America is the greatest opportunity for us to make change to a lot of systems that are structurally deficient and adversely affect Black people and all people of colors. If you look at this COVID-19 virus, you will see that those that are catching this, those that are dying the most are people of color, African Americans and Latinos. So that shows that there are flaws in our health systems. There are flaws in our banking system, flaws in our economic system. So this is unprecedented opportunity for all people of color. And nothing is final yet. We still have a long way to go. So we're gonna have to come together as God's children and make changes that will benefit our children and our grandchildren. Now, to get to your specific question, law enforcement performs law enforcement duties and all kinds of other duties that many of us believe other people could perform those duties. Law enforcement is very, very expensive. So if we reimagine law enforcement and come up with ways to take a lot of those non-violent issues that they deal with and give those jobs to community people and to train professionals, not only should we get a better job, it should be more cost efficient for the city of LA, which means we can then take that money and invest it in our communities even more. Law enforcement will then not have to spread themselves thin. Like example, if there's a call on an abandoned car, a cop with a gun goes and investigates that. You can't tell me that we can't get somebody else to do that that doesn't cost as much. And then that cop with a gun that had to go there might then be able to be patrolling Little Ethiopia or Crenshaw or whatever, doing the types of things that law enforcement is supposed to be focusing on. So we're going to have a great debate identifying nonviolent issues that come up and how we can put in place people to handle those issues, freeing up the police department to focus on catching the bad guys and keeping us safe.
Thank you very much. And also, this also, I mean, you went ahead of me. It's also your proposal about what you have called on June 16, what you have called as an armed model of crisis response team.
Yes.
And this, you gave us one example already about that car by the park, but also, can you give us a few more examples as far as it is? Yeah.
I'll give you some other examples. In the event that you want to report a runaway, you can have trained social workers go out and take all of that information. In the event that there's, heaven forbid, a suicide, you can have trained professionals go and do that job. Mental health issues. I believe there's statistics that show that about 60% of the calls where it relates to homelessness, mental health issues are nonviolent calls. So why don't we have a conversation on tracking that data on those calls and maybe sending a crisis response team that knows how to talk to individuals that are on the streets or individuals that suffer from substance abuse. I know, and maybe many of you know, my oldest son has been off and on Skid Row for 17, 18 years. He has substance abuse issues. He has mental health issues. Whenever individuals go and have a conversation with him that understands mental health triggers, understands addiction, then he communicates with them well. But the show of force creates another response from him. So those are just a few, very, very few examples of the types of things that could be done by unarmed police officers. But before I just go out and say, hey, this is what Herb Wesson thinks, we're going to have a series of hearings, you know, in this city of Los Angeles so that the public can give all of their opinions as well. I just believe that cops should be cops. And if they focus on that, then they can take care of keeping businesses safe, keeping people safe, catching drug dealers and all of that thing, all of those kinds of things. I don't think they joined the police force to supervise a sanitation cleanup of a homeless site. I don't think that's why a person wanted to be in law enforcement.
Yes, and you know, government has its own process. As you said, this is just the beginning, and a lot of conversations will go on, and between politicians, you councilman being there, and other people have to be on board. And as you said, the feedback from the public also will matter. But during this transition, how can you see it that it would be seamless, like a smooth transition, or diverting the responsibilities to social worker? Let's say a few months or a year ahead, how do you see the transition going? Do you see it as smooth, or as long as we're on the same page?
Well, what I think I'm seeing out on the streets, not just in LA, but this country, I think that it is a strong message of change. That's what I believe. And the stronger that message is, the easier the transition will be, because individuals will take it seriously. And so we'll be bringing in the experts, folk from mental health, law enforcement, the advocates that are actually out on the street now, business owners, and we will listen to all of their suggestions, recommendations, as we build a plan that we think could be seamless in transition.
Also, Councilman Herb, this
It's
also will
Herb,
open.
Man. You could, why don't we, since I don't have on, see, I'm not like my dear friend. I don't have on a shirt and a tie, so just call me Herb. That works for me.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me that. As you know, in Ethiopian culture, we do the ato, the gashe, and then the antu, and then if you give me the permission to just call you Herb, I will be happy to do that. Thank you, sir.
Please.
Okay.
Councilman is what I do. Herb is who I am.
Wonderful. Thank you for this. So as this also will open some opportunities for new jobs. But also within that, how hard do you think, or how easy do you think it will be to recruit social workers who will be now the first ones who will be called to attend this type of issues or problems?
Well, I'm excited about the opportunity to give individuals from our part of town jobs with a livable wage and with benefits. So that excites me to no end. And I can just tell you, once we talked about trying to make this transition, a lot of individuals who are social workers have already called in saying, I would love to be part of that program. Just like police officers want to join the police force to catch bad guys and to keep people safe. That is why they should be joining the police force. You have individuals that their entire life, all they wanted to do was help individuals that are having problems. All they want to do is try to help an individual that's having mental issues learn how to control and live with these mental issues. So you have, I believe, a lot of individuals that will just line up to face this challenge. Another way that I anticipate that we would be able to get the kind of staff that we need to perform these functions is to work with nonprofit organizations that are actually on the ground in our community that can send out the notice that, you know, the city of LA, they're looking for individuals that can be part of a crisis response team. They're looking for people that have automobile experience so that they can go out and deal with abandoned vehicles. So, you know, I just think that we can do this in the event that we reach out, we listen to the people that hired us to do a job, and we use common sense going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Herb. And Elias, I will come to you. When we talk about change, change is not only about what our representatives, our politicians do through the process of government. We also need change on the ground. And one of the things is the power of knowledge. So when we talk about it, we cannot ignore the power of education, the entertainment, the media, literature, and so on. So how do you think the knowledge industry can change the narrative of Black history and so on? Elias, I'll bring it to you.
Well, first of all, every industry that you mentioned was constructed not to benefit people of color. There are disparities there. They were all built on racism that goes all the way back to slavery in this country. They were not built for you to succeed. They were built for you to exist and to be, you know, just labor. All of these industries, we have an opportunity to change by having a serious dialogue where it relates to what it is that we need to do. Okay. And at this point in time, so many of these industries want to change or are suggesting that they want to change. So this is a moment like no other.
Okay, and also I think Elias, you can elaborate on that based on what just Herb said. I think you can elaborate it, and then because you're right there working on those things at this time now.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was wonderful. First, I want to thank the youth panelists who came before us. They were fantastic. I'm proud of them. And Councilman Wesson, you have been a champion of our community.
Thank you.
And we are grateful to you and to the African American community. Without your struggle during the civil rights movement and continued struggle, we would not have been here. And we are in Los Angeles and many parts of America because of people like you and the many white people who collaborated with you and the change that needed to be had.
Thank you.
And Jonas, to come back to your question, a few years back, about 15 years ago, my family joined me from Ethiopia. And in the course of our conversation, I realized something. I realized something that I didn't see it in myself, which is that the stories of the African American community that I knew in Ethiopia was not the reality that I was confronted here in South Central Los Angeles when I came to live with my sister. The stories I knew when I was in Ethiopia was the Michael Jacksons, the Michael Jordans, the Magic Johnsons of those celebrities. Those things were the things that I knew. But when I came to Los Angeles, I was confronted by it, and I didn't know how to deal with it. The miseducation that goes around the world through the movies, through textbooks that you read, and we are lucky. I was lucky to be born in Ethiopia, to grow up in Ethiopia with a sense of history that was mine, and that I was able to go back after living in exile for 24 years. I went back, and that's for the first time I realized what our brothers and sisters, the African Americans, lost. They don't have cousins and uncles and aunts to go back to. That's what they lost. That's what I was able to get back. And I lived with that anxiety that I will never be able to see my family, but I was able to see it. But my African-American brother and sister, they lost it for 400 plus years. And that's the crime, that they can't be able to be paid in any form or shape you think. Then comes to your questions, that now the history that we know of the world is not African history. The history that we know of now is Eurocentric history, because knowledge was created, started to create, as the councilman said, that the history was written in such a way to reflect the Eurocentric point of view. Because as we know that publishing started, the printing press started in Germany, and the Eurocentric educational, the form that the world now is governed, was propagated from there. So books created other books. Books created films. Books created our educational curriculum. That means that the things we know was structurally created to make us believe that we are inferior, even though the facts tell us differently. The facts tell us that Africa is where civilization, humanity, and you can go to even the major scholars in the world, the archaeology, the genome sequence, in any form or shape, go back to it, it just tells you the reality is different. Go to religion, it's Islam, Christianity, and even Judaism. Without Africa, it would not be there. But what they told us through this educational means and mechanisms is that these things are not from Africa. Even they took Africa out of the continent, Ethiopia out of the continent, and placed it somewhere to just play with our minds. So I will illustrate a couple of examples so that you can see this. And one is, for example, that the African history series that they do, which is that placing Africa, placing Ethiopia with the Semitic studies, not with the African studies, placing the African political, the Egypt, not as dividing the continent into two, placing even just the map. The map, Africa map, is smaller than Europe, even when you see it, but Africa is huge. So what I'm saying is that knowledge is not created to benefit us. It was created to benefit these colonial countries and corporations that rule us. And unfortunately, we continued to be governed by them. So we need to decolonize our mind, our education, our lifestyle, and that begins from home. So we need to start to read, engage, and also, as one of the youth panelists earlier mentioned, that we need to be the fabric that changes this political system. We need to run for offices. We need to support people who stand for our agenda. This is not an Ethiopian or an African-American agenda. This is a human agenda that we have to support, where it doesn't lose anyone, but supports everyone that needs to be supported. So I think the knowledge economy, the knowledge industry is not created for us. And what was done in the past centuries through books and educational materials is now recreated through Netflix and other programs. If you go to Netflix now, there are so many films about Europe earlier past, but you can see nothing about African history. So I don't want to wait for them to do it. We are going to do it. We are going to be documenting our films. We are going to be creating our own films, not only publishing started High Films, and that's one of the things that we're working on. We're collaborating with some people in Hollywood. So I think those are the kind of things we need to be doing.
And if you can please, while we're still here, expand on you being the founder of the Harriet Tubman Press. It's High Publishers, one of the latest imprint. Again, you just mentioned a few things at the end about, getting access into the media outlet to make a difference. What are the steps that are taken in order to publish this types of, Black rich history into the mainstream outlet?
Thank you. As I said earlier, that we stand on our African-American brothers and their shoulders in their struggle. And now we are in a place where we are publishing books and we are in a university. And that means that we have to give back in a way that is, incumbent upon us so that we can be able to contribute something tangible. I lived very close to Leimert Park for many years, and I have confronted with that there was not many books coming out of that community in a publishing system. So we wanted to change that. And so the way we did it was that to have there are few imprints in many university presses And this is our Harriet Tubman Press is the latest one in that space. So what Harriet Tubman Press does is that it gives the voice for African American communities in our neighborhood, in our city, in our surroundings. So it's not, it's not one way that, it's also two ways that we have to, as much as we received, it's expected for us to give back, even though small. It's not a lot. It's very small. As an immigrant publishing company, started by an immigrant publishing company, it's small that we're giving, but it's upon us to be able to provide that space for our brothers and sisters in African American community.
Wonderful. As you allowed me, Herb, I'll come to you. And with all this, with the changes that we have, and you mentioned about all the policies that could take effect, and the conversation is starting already. And what Elias also said vis-a-vis to the literature, education, and learning, and gaining knowledge about who we really are. We had a youth panel just before you, between 6 and 7 o'clock, and very passionate about the movement, and those Ethiopian descendants who are really into the movement that is going on now. So what would you say to the youth, to the immigrants who are coming, everybody from all races, to be involved in the conversation and keep the momentum going?
Okay, what I believe gives the United States of America the best chance to be the greatest nation in the world is our people, our diversity, and our cultures, all blending together, where individuals are given the opportunities to travel as far as their imagination and their abilities will take them. We're not at that point yet. Some of us break through, and some of us kind of sort of make it, but it's not, that path is not open for all. And if there's going to be change in this country, sometimes people get it confused, Elias, that it is the elected people like me. It is not. The reason why I'm right now running, doing as much as I can on the city council with a couple of my other Black colleagues is because the young people have captured the attention of the world. They have created a crisis, and I believe you never let a good crisis go unused. So it is because of their tenacity and because of their commitment that we're going to be able, if we can come together at the appropriate time, to do the things that create an equal playing field in this country. It is because of the young people that my kids and grandkids may live a better life than me. And when we get, let me just say this, and now, when we get folk that we get to know, like I've gotten to know your community, and I love it. Personally, I love it because a lot of you guys are my height. So I like being comfortable, when I'm out. But you've shared your culture with us, your history, that you can go back generations. These are things that we don't have. My wife was adopted by an Ethiopian family recently as part of, I've been adopted by a Nigerian family. These things are so important to us as Black people because it connects us to the ancestors from whence we came.
And also, while we're in this, of course, the young people who are here, they are grown as Americans and they more adapt to the American culture. But those first generation who came in, they become citizens. And what do you tell us as part of being involved in politics?
Well, I can't think of anything that is more or that should be more important to people of color than to actually go out and exercise your right to vote. And if you are not a citizen, there's a big need for you to go out and to make sure that the people that are registered to vote, vote, because your day will come. It is because of the very young people that you had on this call that we have a chance to be better. We have a chance to do more. But this is going to be a little uncomfortable. There are going to be people that can't understand it. And that's why it's so important that our young people today do continue to do what they're doing. I think if you look at a lot of countries, you will see that the biggest changes that have occurred have not been because of a king, a prince, a president, it's been because of a movement of young people.
Okay, and Herb, we were told that you can stay with us for half hour, and then we don't want to hold you. So if I can ask you one last question, yes. And I will go to Elias. Just overall, as you told me, instead of calling you councilman, as Herb Wesson,
yes.
What does this moment in time mean to you?
This could be the biggest moment in this country since the slaves were freed. We have had President Kennedy elected, and that was a big thing. Civil rights, voting rights in the 60s, that was a great thing. We elected a half African president, for Christ's sake. That was a great thing. But I think we have the opportunity to really move the needle and to try to get rid of disparities that have plagued us since slavery. So this is our moment. I'm not going to miss it. That for me, damn politics, I am not going to miss this moment. I'm going to do what my heart tells me. I'm going to do what my ancestors tell me. And this is the time for unbelievable change. And don't let anyone tell you not. This is our moment, folks. Let's change the frickin' world.
And while we are in this, I wanted to add something that I think you and Nate Holden and many other of your colleagues did something unthinkable several years ago, which is naming the Little Ethiopia for what it is. But as you know, that unfortunately, that except one person who already sold it and left, none of us owns those space. And we are currently, the gentrification of our space, as gentrification of our stories, has been really strangling us. And as the only African country represented in an American space, I think it is this moment that I think we need to come together. We need to do whatever it takes to be able to secure that space.
Yes, I agree.
From gentrifying that space. And for that reason, I think one of the things to replace our stories in Los Angeles, where the world story is being told through films, we have only one Black bookstore. That's unfortunate, but we are very happy of S1 bookstores. They have been doing a fantastic job, but we need a Black bookstore, an Ethiopian bookstore in Little Ethiopia, and we're planning to do that. For that and many other reasons, I think we have to make sure that Little Ethiopia stays there, and we need your help. And just wanted to make sure that it's important.
I'm gonna always be there for you because you are me. And I am you. So I will always be there for you. Gentrification is affecting so many of our areas. And again, that can go back to slavery and the challenge that it has been for us as a people to own our own property. If you want to see people become free, then you have to give them land that they can own. And one of the things that I did support and will support again is the creation of a public bank that will build the types of housing that we need, but also a public bank that would be open to making loans of significance to people of color. That's one of the biggest problems. That's one of the most racist systems in existence, is the banking system. So if we could somehow change that, where there's a public bank that their focus is not on profit, but on maintaining and building our infrastructure, that gives us the capital that we need to maintain Little Ethiopia, to maintain the historic Leimert Park and what have you. So I could talk to you for days on end about this, and have just enjoyed being invited to participate, and would gladly participate in anything that you're doing in the future. And it's good to see you again, my friend. Giannis, you've done a phenomenal job as a moderator.
Thank you very much, Herbosen. And then one thing that you have to promise me is we'll continue this conversation over sambusa, right?
Well, that's my weakness.
Okay.
That is my, I don't know if that is healthy or not, but I eat like 8 of them at a clip. I love that. That is my favorite. And I hate to make you guys just go crazy, but sometimes I put hot sauce on it.
Yay! That's the way to go, Councilman. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us, for giving us this time, and we'll talk to you soon, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Now we go to Elias. Elias, thank you for staying through this, and we have a few more questions for you that can help us see what we're doing, and you as a publisher. And you focus more on knowledge and making us aware of our surroundings and going back in history and doing this. So I have this question. As you can see, there are a lot of movements that are going on, including the Black Lives Matters movement and even other type of movements that are not really in the mass media, but people are doing their share as far as changing this. And I will quote you on this. From the Los Angeles Review of Books, you had said, without the sustained ability to tell our own stories, the world will not be able to truly know us and to learn about our contribution to the human family and world civilization. What shall we do to continue this movement parallel to the Black Lives Matters and all the other movements that are going on?
I think the first thing to know is, for ourselves, we have to know those history for ourselves. I think it should start from home. How many of us know that humanity starts in Africa, in Ethiopia and a few other places, in the African Rift Valley, that is. How many people know that Islam was saved in Ethiopia? And Moses had an advisor, a military general, for an Ethiopian, and who happens to be his father-in-law also. Moses married an Ethiopian, and as we know, that the Ethiopian Jews history and indigenous religions, and so many. And if you go to Nigeria, if you go to Ghana, if you go to Zimbabwe and other African places, there are these incredible stories that we can take from. And for all this, we are much better and bigger. But the problem is that our stories were taken away from us. They were taken away, was also told differently. It happened for a reason. It happened because they published a book. They told us in the books that they published, that they said that the story, the Ethiopian history, is dangerous for us to keep the other countries in Africa, the colonized. So we have to destroy Ethiopia, Ethiopia's history and Ethiopia's legacy. And they did it. They did it specifically. Actually, there is a book that we published in Amharic, and we're about to publish it in English. Ethiopia, the Powder Barrel, Ethiopia, Barud Vermel. And in that book, Parochaska writes, this book was published in 1935, before the Italian invaded Ethiopia. In that book, he says that Ethiopians need to be divided within. We have to help them divide within by destroying the royal family, by destroying the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, by destroying the ethnic groups in Ethiopia. And looking back in hindsight, what has happened since 1935 was that the modern education expansion in Ethiopia. And what did we allow ourselves to do? We allowed the British government to create the Ethiopian educational system. And as Malcolm X said, that if you want to destroy your family, that allow your enemy to teach your kids. And that's what we allowed to do. And the educational system that Emperor Haile Selassie brought into Ethiopia as the modernizing factor created the current political calamity that we are witnessing. Our educational system allowed us, changed our language, that's the most important one, and that changed our history. And it took away our children to go and do their PhDs in Europe and came back and started to teach us the history that is dividing us currently. And the people who are advocating for the change of language, letters from Ge'ez to Latin alphabets are not foreigners who are doing it. Now the advocacy comes from our own people, Ethiopians. But at the same time, the books that these people were used to advocate were not made by us, not financed by us. It was actually created by the colonial European forces. And so that colonial force is gone 60 years ago, but still exists through the corporations, through the system that still wants to continue to subjugate the African continent, to be able to embezzle its resources and its human capital. For the last 50 years, what has happened? Africa has been sending its best and bright students or educated classes to Europe and America in the disguise of the brain drain, and Africa lost greatly with that. So I think those are the things that we need to change.
I'm glad you brought this up because it correlates with what the Mehret Kasa said earlier from the youth panel, that there are some ways of colonialism and racism that exist, even though we claim that Ethiopia is independent and some African countries are now independent from being colonized. There are different ways. The main one, which is knowledge, that we still believe what they're telling us instead of creating our own story or our own history and then the things that we are in. And with this, I will ask you a response to, maybe it's kind of the same question, but you can expand on it. In response to George Floyd murder, the movements that exist, how can the Ethiopian and the African communities here in Los Angeles area and maybe beyond can work together to lift the suppressed history that we're talking about? Locally here, what can we do?
I think the most important thing is that in America, we're not Ethiopians. In America, we are Blacks. When I go back to Ethiopia, or when I go to Africa, when I go to Kenya or Nigeria, I become an African. When I come to America, I become a Black person. The Black person comes with all the things that we see happening to many of our brothers and sisters in America. Being attacked by a police officer is not preserved for African Americans, elected African Americans. Ethiopians have been a victim of, as a Black people, as a part of that community. Ethiopians have been victims in late 1980s. An Ethiopian in Oregon was killed with a baseball bat by racist group in Oregon, and police killed Ethiopian in Washington, D.C. And so whatever is happening to African Americans, it's also happening to us as we belong in that community. So our struggle is the same. Our story is different. Our story, how we get to this point, is different. But at the same time, as we have to learn from the African American struggle so that we can understand and be part of that collective struggle together, we have to help them also learn about our history. And unfortunately, we are busy trying to live life and succeed because we come from a different country. We have totally different educational background, language barriers, to make sure that while we are, going through that process, we miss time and we lose time. But I think going forward, I think what we need to do is that we need to engage further, more, with an open heart and compassion, and we have to be able to sympathize with the history, with where they come from. But at the same time, another thing that we have to understand, very important thing we have to understand, is that in time of need, African Americans has been there for us. In the mid-30s, when the Italians invaded Ethiopia, the African American community came out in Harlem, and in hundreds volunteered to go to Ethiopia as soldiers, medical doctors, individuals, sports people, musicians, every single person registered to go to Ethiopia. And that is the legacy that we will never forget, that we have. After the Emperor Menelik won the Adwa War, the story of Ethiopia has been very much in the news. So African American learned greatly about it, and there were many people who left from America. African Americans went to Ethiopia to serve at the palace. One of them was the medical doctor of Emperor Menelik. Another person in a different generation was a pilot who went and helped start the Ethiopian Air Force. So if we really study it carefully, our struggle was really intertwined. But the stories, we don't get a chance to hear about it because we are not propagating it, or the other forces that controls the media wanted to be here. So you don't find this in history books, you don't find it in textbooks. But we have to write those things, and we have to communicate on those issues. And especially the children who are born here and who grew up here, they have to know these stories. And so those are the kind of things that we need to be doing further.
When you and I were having a conversation prior to this, maybe if you want to focus on that, there is also that problem where, when you mentioned our children, the Ethiopian children, where we tell them all about this not being colonized and so on, and then they grow, and when they go to school, the African history starts from somewhere else. Yeah. So as parents, how do we balance that so that the children can get both history and then also, have a balanced knowledge of what Africanism is? Yeah,
thank you. That's very important. And I think the history, African history needs to be decolonized first in America or in Europe. Let me tell you a couple of stories. One is that this Ethiopian diplomat who used to live actually in Pasadena here in Los Angeles, his daughter, he was a diplomat in Italy, and his daughter went to school there. And one day she came back crying. And he said, what happened? And she was so very angry at him. And she said that you told me a wrong history about Adwa. And she said, what are you talking about? And she said that my teacher told me that Adwa, Ethiopia didn't win, the Italians did. And she said, no, that's not the fact. And actually she said that she opened her history book and she said, this is what we learned today. And this is what my teacher showed me. And he tried to explain to her, but the kid believed her teacher because it was written in a textbook that she was reading. Okay, how many stories are like that? How many of us see CNN or some kind of a report or anything printed? We believe that that's true, And so the stories are not written to benefit us. And I think that's the most important thing to remember. And in Texas, as we remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, recently, as like 4 years ago, the history book said that the African slavery didn't happen. They said that migrant workers from Africa. So, if that's what we're teaching to our children, what are we going to be at the end? What are we going to do? And I think that's why earlier I talked about that it starts from home, that we have to teach them who they are. And as Ethiopian parents, you have to teach them who they are through going to Ethiopian history. That helped them so much. And at the same time, not only to them, but also we have to teach Ethiopian history to our neighbors and our colleagues so that they know and understand where we come from. while we're at this point, I want to mention this. I think it was the second year I came to America, and I was doing this public TV program, and I was interviewed with one of my African American friends, and he was upset, and he said that you Ethiopians say that you're not you're not African, and I said, you may not. I didn't know. I've never heard of that, but he asked me that question, and the way he was asking me was emotional for him, and so. And he said, you're not black. And the question just kept badgering me. And I stopped him and I said, what are you talking about? And you see, Ethiopia is in Africa. And I was trying to explain to him, we are in the Horn of Africa. So if we are in this map, we cannot be African. We are African, period. And he said, you say that you're not blacks. And I said, what are you talking about? I am black.
I'm black.
There's
Yes.
no white in Ethiopia. We are all black. You know, and so, but one thing that I realized later on was that the question was not about our color, our geographic location. The color was the confusion between slavery or colonialism or the stories that was written in Europe to make their own agenda during that time. How can you tell another black person there is an Ethiopian kingdom with kings and queens that they have never been colonized? And then you try to continue to subjugate them to where they are. They are going to revolt. So you keep telling, you have to change that narrative. You have to tell them, oh no, these are not black people, because there is no internet, there is no Facebook for you to see them. So you can be able to manipulate their mind to think that these people are white. We are as black as ever been. We have never changed. You understand? So, so the stories came because they had a political agenda. The political agenda that took Ethiopia out and put it in we go to Library of Congress today. Go to Library of Congress today, and you don't find Ethiopia in the African section. It is in the Middle East Hebraic section that Ethiopian history is.
Yes.
So the reason I'm talking about this is that it's very important to understand the systems that we live in, the systems we are using, the educational books, the stories we are told. We have to stop and think twice before we start to judge others, and also to internalize the stories told to us.
Yes, and Elias, I think you made it clear for all of us that even what the Ethiopian Americans go through, like Melat told us earlier, whereas, you know, you're not black enough, you're not white enough, so we're stuck in the middle. I think it's also for us who came growing up in Ethiopia during our teenage years and so on, and the struggle is there, but the only way we can open it up is what the youth are doing, opening the platform, communicating, learning from each other without feeling that superiority or saying, you know, we've never been colonized, but to have that conversation and have the platform. Time is running out, and I know with you, we can go on and on and on. And one thing that I will not leave without injecting in this discussion is the fact that I'm a member of Tzahai Salon Book Club in Los Angeles, and you know, we read a lot of books that have been published by Tzahai Publisher, and we are about Ethiopia, about Africa, and everything. So I encourage people to do that, and we've been going around for 4 years now, I think, and it's an excellent way to start somewhere. So at least we can open the books and start reading. You know, like all of us. You know, some of us came in the 70s, not me, but you know, some came in the 70s, some in the 80s, and you've been here living in Los Angeles for 26 years, and mostly working on and kind of, you know, I applaud you for what you have achieved, and you know, from nothing you came up to this, where not only selfless work, like giving knowledge to others. It's an amazing platform. So all this for the past 26 years that you've been here, what is this moment, the past few months, really mean to you?
I'm one of those people who care about this kind of moments, because we have had several missed opportunities, and I don't want this to be one of them. Because maybe one of us would be in that under that knee, if not worse. So we have to we're not different. We are the same. This is happening to us all. So we have to take this seriously, and we have to engage politically or otherwise. And we have to vote. And I think the enabling factor to something like this is the political office. The person who is in the helm of power allowed this kind of personalities to feel strengthened to be able to go rampant and continue what we thought was left behind in American history. So I think there was something in Washington, D.C. during the election of President Obama. We have witnessed something dynamic. The Ethiopian community, many of the taxi cab drivers organized themselves, and they took people of color and anyone who want to vote, they give free rides. So you can do as simple thing as giving right to somebody. You don't have to be an American citizen to help somebody else. So we have to make sure that we vote if we are American citizen. But if we're not American citizen, we have to be a part of the solution, because tomorrow it's your own children who are going to suffer from this. We need to fix America. We're not fixing America for somebody else. We're fixing America for our own good sake. Because when you have a sick country like America, as big and as wonderful America was for us, America can be sometimes bad. And that's the worst that we live in today. So we have to, as we benefited from American goodness, we have to also be there for its time of sickness. And this moment that we live in is that time of sickness that I think America deserves our, genuine help to come to her best, which we know that there is something there.
All right. Thank you very much, Elias Ondumo. All these conversations we have since 6 o'clock with Melat, Mhiret, Haywan, Councilman Herb Wesson, and Elias Ondumo. This is all the process that we need, a platform so that, as you just mentioned, Elias, the healing process. So to be part of the healing process, not to really just sit and watch what's going on, just to be part of the change and the healing process. So I truly, truly appreciate, on behalf of ECLA, all the guests that came. And I think this conversation impacted many people, and the conversation will go on, and all of you will come back and educate us more and have this open discussion. I thank you very much, everybody. መልካም ሳምንት እንመኛላችኋለን። ከኢሲኤልኤ ደህና ሁኑ እንላለን። በሰላም ሁኑ። ኤልያስ, thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.